This video will briefly define rhetorical analysis for your English course. Let's begin by defining a few terms. Analysis is breaking something apart into its component parts and examining how these pieces impact the whole. For example, you might conduct an analysis in the sciences when you look at data and try to determine patterns that would identify a larger trend. Data collection and analysis has been used throughout history. So for example, in the mid-1800s, they were able to use analysis to identify the source of a cholera outbreak in central London. Another important term is rhetoric. Rhetoric is often defined as the art or study of discourse or communication. It often focuses on persuasive speaking, writing, or visual communication. When we talk about rhetoric, we don't just look at what is said in a piece of communication, but how it's said or how ideas are communicated. When we put these terms together, we have rhetorical analysis. In a rhetorical analysis, we will break apart a piece of communication, typically an argument, to better understand it. We will look at all the parts of the argument to determine how these pieces help it achieve the overall goal. By conducting an analysis of an argument, you will learn how arguments work and what strategies can make an argument more or less effective. This will prepare you to create stronger arguments of your own. Let's look at a few examples of statements you might make in an essay and determine which ones would qualify as analytical. First, in Why Being a Jerk at Work Pays, Amy Ryder explains how being more assertive at work can help one excel in his or her job. However, she finds that women are limited in how assertive they can be. This statement is an example of a summary. It gives the main ideas that Ryder communicates in her work, but it doesn't offer anything on top of that. It doesn't argue or analyze. It just describes what the article was about. Let's look at another statement. I disagree with Amy Ryder's argument in Why Being a Jerk at Work Pays, because in my own experience, managers and employees earn respect by being considerate and kind. This statement is an example of a response or an argument. It offers the student's viewpoint on the topic, but it doesn't break down how Ryder makes her argument. So this is also not an example of an analysis. Okay, here's our final statement. In her article, Amy Ryder provides evidence in the form of personal experience and cited studies, strengthening both her appeals to pathos and logos. By appealing to both emotion and reason, Ryder is able to convince a larger audience to accept her claims. This statement is an example of an analytical statement. It breaks down how Ryder has communicated her argument. It looks at her use of personal experience and cited studies. It looks at how she uses pathos and logos, which are both rhetorical appeals. And it examines how she is able to use these strategies to impact her audience. So it's broken apart the pieces of her argument, how it's presented, to determine how the argument is able to connect with the audience. There are many ways to break apart an argument when conducting a rhetorical analysis, and many different elements you might consider. You might want to break apart the rhetorical appeals or the author's word choice. You might examine literary devices like metaphors and similes more closely, or consider the types of evidence that an author decides to use. If you're looking at an argument with visual components, you might examine the color and the imagery and the impact those elements may have on an audience. If you're listening to a speech, the volume can impact how an audience interprets certain parts of a speech. All of these things can work together to create a certain tone, and that can be part of how an author or a speaker impacts his or her audience. Just remember, a rhetorical analysis focuses on how arguments are presented and what strategies are used to achieve the ultimate goal. Check your eCampus for more information on things you might analyze in your rhetorical analysis. And as always, email your instructor if you have any questions.